Welcome to the second episode of the Rise of the Ottoman Empire. We're gonna be, I guess, seeing more of the Ottoman expansion into the Byzantine holdings and the rest of Anatolia. So let's get to it, shall we?
After securing victories at the battles of Bafeus and Dimbos, the Ottoman state under Osman Gazi was poised to follow up their successes with the eventual conquest of Byzantine Bithynia. Within only 2 decades, the Ottoman Beylik had transformed from a tiny territorial pocket of 2 minor villages to a realm of a few dozen towns and major castles. This swift acquisition of new land from the Byzantines would result in a steady migration of Turkic peoples from central Anatolia into the Ottoman Beylik, bolstering Osman's military and economic capacities to wage wars against his infidel neighbors up north. Further Turkic migration into Ottoman lands would increase in scale during the first decade of the 14th century, as the Sultanate of Rum would collapse after years of internal struggles, leaving central Anatolia in a state of social and political unrest between the newly established beyliks in the region. Meanwhile,
That's interesting. As we all know, chaos can create great opportunity. So, I'm assuming that we're gonna be covering more of the Ottomans. So far, the Ottomans seem to be mainly focused on Rome and taking their territory, but I imagine eventually they're going to set their eyes on all their neighbors here, right? Either absorb them, or conquer them, etc. And yeah.
with the last of his Anatolian holdings at risk of falling to the various Muslim powers of the region after the battles of Bafeus and Dimbos, Andronikos II began searching for outside help to fend off the Turkic incursions into his lands. The Roman Emperor would first send letters to Mahmud Ghazan of the Ilkhanate, in the hopes of convincing the Mongol ruler to reassert Mongol power in Anatolia after the fall of the Sultanate of Rum. However, with the major Mongol defeat against the Mamluks during the Battle of Marj al-Safar, and the further decentralization of Mongol domains in the Middle East, talks between the Byzantines and the Ilkhanate failed to achieve any results. Andronikos II would then turn to the Great Catalan Company, a mercenary group from Western Europe, famous for their military exploits in the hilly ranges of Spain and Sicily. Accepting the call for help, the 8,000-strong Catalan Company would arrive in Constantinople at the start of 1303. In an act to bolster morale and loyalty amongst the Catalans, the Italian commander of the mercenary group, Roger de Flor, would be given the coveted imperial title of Megas Dux, and would be promised the emperor's niece in the hopes for a successful military campaign. However, the Catalans would also prove ineffective for the Byzantine Empire, as the mercenary company, instead of focusing on reconquering Byzantine lands in western Anatolia, indiscriminately plundered the peoples of the countryside, regardless of their religious affiliation, for their own gain, thus alienating the remaining Christian population in the region from Byzantine rule.
I'm telling you, the Byzantines had such awful luck, especially near the end. And I guess that's kind of the problem with mercenaries, right? We've seen a lot of mercenary groups in these videos, and yeah, they can't always be the most reliable group of people, to put it nicely, you know? So yeah.
Gaining nothing from his expensive gamble to retake his Anatolian holdings, Andronikos II, in a disastrous move, would murder Roger de Flor during a banquet, which would result in a bloody 2-year war between imperial forces and the Catalans in Thrace. While the Catalans...
Holy crap. Yeah, it sucks.
had been marauding in western Anatolia, the Ottomans were forced to withdraw from their blockades of Prusa and Nicaea. But now that the Latin mercenaries had turned upon their former employers, Osman Gazi could resume conducting major raids into Byzantine Bithynia. During this period, the towns of Hamankaya, Geve, Mudanya, Andranos, Yalova, and Akyezi were slowly incorporated into the Ottoman Beylik, cutting the Byzantines off from their key cities of Prusa and Nicaea. It was also during this period that Byzantine imperial authority in western Anatolia became non-existent, as local Turkic beyliks in the region began annexing such Eastern Roman towns as Ephesus in 1308, Smyrna in 1310, and Magnesia in 1313. Only the town of Philadelphia would remain in Byzantine hands, as the rest of western Anatolia would swiftly fall into Muslim rule.
Yeah, they basically have lost, other than the few cities, they basically have lost their holdings in Anatolia.
As a result of the rapid disintegration of Byzantine power in Anatolia and the inept rule of Andronikos II, during the year 1321, a new round of Byzantine civil wars would erupt between the emperor and his usurper grandson Andronikos III. Wanting to take advantage of Byzantine civil unrest, the now 60-year-old Osman began his final preparations for his long-awaited siege on Prusa. Lacking the siege equipment to seize the city, Osman would instead order the construction of 2 major forts around Prusa to oversee the city's blockade. Upon the construction of the forts, a 10,000-strong Ottoman garrison, led by Osman's son Orhan Gazi, was installed, thus cutting off Prusa from the rest of the world. As the Byzantine civil war raged on in Thrace between members of the Palaiologos dynasty, Prusa was left at the mercy of Osman and his armies. After many years of withstanding the Ottoman army at his gates, on April 6 of 1326, the governor of Prusa would officially surrender the city to Orhan after seeing that no reinforcements from Constantinople were coming to their aid. The city of Prusa would be the first major walled city to come under Ottoman rule, effectively doubling the wealth and population of the Beylik overnight. However, the first leader of the Ottomans would not live to see the conquest of Prusa, as he would die shortly before the conclusion of the siege. Osman Gazi, who had fought the Byzantines for more than 40 years and won countless victories for his Beylik, only left a horse, a couple of oxen, and a few flocks of sheep to his name. Unlike other Turkic warlords who hoarded their wealth, Osman Gazi, according to traditional chronicles, spent all his wealth on his subjects, thus making him very popular with the local Muslim and Christian populace of Bithynia. In the centuries after his death, he would be regarded as the ideal sultan, in which all future Ottoman sultans tried to replicate his reputation as a brave and just leader. Every Ottoman leader from then onwards would carry the Sword of Osman during their enthronement ceremony, as a way to proclaim their reign to be noble and just like the humble founder of the empire. Upon the conquest of Prusa, Osman's body would be laid to rest within the walls of the city, a wish that he made to his son Orhan during the beginning of the siege. After its
that's really cool. Rip Osman. And yeah, look at what he accomplished in his lifetime. Like, granted, he also did have the advantage of just the Byzantines being a complete mess, you know, with their ruling and just weak overall. So, not to take away from him, you know, but yeah, definitely, like, he did accomplish a lot. And Prusa under, like, his, well, you know, still, that's still not a bad way to wrap it all up. And overall, that's really cool that even that his sword became such a ceremonial aspect for future leaders, you know. Overall, just seemed like a really cool, humble guy. And usually a lot of, you know, founders and whatnot are kind of, at least what we noticed with like the early Muslim expansion, like there's a bit of humility and less extravagance in the beginning of things, right? But usually that kind of comes later when, you know, empires get bigger and whatnot. But still, rip to him. That's so cool that he was like kind of like the first, you know what I mean? And just, I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot of, you know, rulers and whatnot, but I never knew he was the first, so that's really cool to have seen his exploits and his accomplishments in his life, you know?
Capture, Prusa, thereafter known as Bursa, became the new capital of the Ottoman Beylik. Shortly after this, an issue of succession sprung up between the two sons of Osman. According to a more traditional rendering of events, the more martially experienced Orhan and more diplomatically inclined Alaeddin agreed on a political agreement in which the former would become the new Bey of the Ottomans, while the latter would be given the new political position of Grand Vizier. This political partnership would prove vital for future Ottoman statecraft, as when Orhan was off on military campaigns conquering new lands, Aledin would oversee running the daily domestic matters of the state from Bursa.
That's just a good partnership right there. That sounds incredibly great. And you kind of need a bit of both, I think, when you're running an empire, essentially, right? You need to be strong in terms of military, but you also need diplomacy in order to hold things together. So actually, it sounds like a really great partnership. I thought, normally when we see, like, siblings in next in line for the throne, usually get erupt to civil war and everyone's killing each other. So far, this seems like a pretty peaceful and actually beneficial compromise to help the efficiency of, you know, the new Ottoman growing empire. So yeah, that's a first. Usually these things are bloody.
In the few years after the conquest of Bursa, the new leader of the Ottomans would launch a military campaign into Byzantine Bithynia, reaching as far as the village of Idos, thereby cutting off Constantinople from the major city of Nicomedia. By 1328, Nicaea would once again be put under a siege led by Orhan and his eldest son, Suleiman Pasha. That same year, the 7-year Byzantine civil war would end, and a new emperor, Andronikos III, would unite the Byzantine realm after defeating his grandfather and forcing him to retire to a monastery. The new and untested emperor would start his reign off by ordering an official imperial campaign to retake lost lands in Bithynia and relieve the blockade of Nicaea. With the support of his grand domestic and close friend, John Kantakouzenos, Andronikos III was able to fund and muster around 4,000 infantry for his new Grand Anatolian campaign. The plan for the first portion of the campaign was for imperial forces to cross into Anatolia via the Bosporus, force march to Nicomedia, resupply and gather more forces in that city, then march on Nicaea to lift the Ottoman blockade. If all went well,
So yeah, Andronikos, you just got out of a civil war, which 7 years, I don't know the specifics of it, but I imagine that probably was a bit of a zap in terms of resources and manpower. A guess, I could be wrong, but, you know, if I am correct, then immediately going into another campaign against a growing force that's only getting stronger while your empire is getting weaker, yeah, it doesn't sound like a good thing, at least right away, but then again, there's also that idea that the longer he waits, the stronger his enemy will get, so probably striking quicker. Try to put a stamp on this growing empire before it gets too out of control, but yeah. I don't know, there's a lot. We'll see what he's made of. And his plan so far seems interesting, like basically take the, you know, quickly resupply and help the siege, but again, we're gonna have to see how a Byzantine army does against an Ottoman army. I mean, we kind of already seen that already, but, you know, we're gonna have to see how the Ottomans have advanced since their last official battles against some of the governors, you know? Because this is the emperor now. You know, Osman fought some, you know, governors and came out on top. We'll see if the emperor can do any different, you know?
and Nicaea was relieved from Ottoman forces, the emperor would then conduct the slow process of pushing back the Turks from Bithynia and re-establishing Roman rule in the region. As the Byzantines were preparing for their crossing to Anatolia, Orhan, who was still personally leading the blockade on Nicaea, heard the news of the incoming Byzantine military campaign and withdrew most of his besieging forces to meet the Byzantine host before they could regroup in Nicomedia.
I'm Sarah.
Okay, so Orhan had the advantage of good intel to quickly shit position, so it seems like now he's taking the initiative away from the Byzantines. Because, you know, Andronicus wanted to quickly march and meet him, but now, the Ottomans have turned that around and they're going to meet him before he can conduct his plan. And I guess we'll find out if Andronicus gets intel about the approaching Ottoman approach, but yeah, overall it seems like the Ottomans want to take the initiative, right? And kind of force the battle on their terms, which often has been, more beneficial to the side who takes the initiative in these videos, right?
After many months of anticipation, Andronikos III and his newly assembled army crossed into Anatolia in June 1329. However, after only 3 days of marching along the shore of the Gulf of Nicomedia, the imperial forces met a Turkish host of 8,000, led by the Ottoman Bey himself, near modern-day Maltepe, blocking the main road to Nicomedia. With his foe stationed on a nearby hill and having twice his manpower, conditions were far from favourable for Andronikos. In spite of the great odds, on June 10th, the ambitious Byzantine emperor accepted Orhan's challenge and deployed his forces for an upcoming engagement. The following Battle of Pelikanon would begin when 300 Ottoman mounted archers suddenly rode down the hill and began harassing their foes with arrows. Being undeterred by the missiles from above, Eastern Roman forces made their way up the hill in a tight...
Okay, so I will say Andronicus strikes me as a very ambitious man, obviously, He went to war for the throne, and someone who's a real go-getter. Though I will say, though, yeah, the conditions for this battle are not unfavorable towards him whatsoever. First of all, the numerical superiority, which we know isn't everything, right? Like, plenty of numerically inferior armies have prevailed, but the thing is, also, they're fighting uphill. They have the high ground, the advantageous position in most battles. Like, that's already kind of another factor that's not working, I feel. But I guess we will find out, though. For all I know, if Andronicus pulls it off, he definitely might have more potential. So I guess we'll see. But so far, the conditions don't look good. You know what I mean?
Formation, even managing to drive back 2 waves of Ottoman assaults down the hill. However, as day turned into night, and seeing that Turkish assaults were not ceasing anytime soon, the Byzantine army began to withdraw back to their camp in order to conduct an orderly retreat in the morning back to Constantinople. But during this withdrawal, Ottoman cavalry had managed to position itself at the rear of the Byzantine army and proceeded to charge at the now exposed flanks of the imperial bodyguard of Andronikos III, thus wounding the emperor in the process. A panic arose within the Byzantine ranks due to the unexpected attack, and the rumor of the emperor being slain on the battlefield began to spread among the rank-and-file men of the army, an army that was starting to lose its battle cohesion after being exhausted by multiple hours of combat with Orhan's host. As the wounded Andronikos was stretchered off the battlefield alongside his personal entourage, the morale-depleted Byzantine army scattered in the plain below the main Ottoman hill. Throughout the night and into the following morning, Turkish Akinci horsemen picked off the remaining routing Roman forces, thus ending the engagement in an Ottoman victory.
Dang.
The Battle of Pelikanon would be the first direct encounter between the heads of state of the Byzantine and Ottoman realms. With the Eastern Roman relief army being destroyed during the battle, Nicomedia and Nicaea were on their own against Orhan and his besieging forces. After Pelikanon...
Yeah, what a complete disaster. And I have to say, Orhan really did well in terms of just using his numerical superiority to create, to attack the flanks of Andronikos, positioning his horsemen and attacking the enemy when he least expected. Overall, just great positioning on his part, And yeah, he took the initiative. He took the fight. He had Orhan picked an area that gave him the most advantageous, position in the battle, and overall just really incredibly well done. And again, the significance is not lost on me that this is the first time the heads of state are against each other, and Orhan kind of wrecked Andronikos. So yeah, overall, really well done on his part.
Andronikos III officially declared a policy of containment when it came to the Turks of Anatolia, thus ending more than 1,000 years of Roman military presence in Anatolia. Within 3 years of the battle, Nicaea would surrender to Orhan, and Nicomedia would follow soon after in 1337. A vast majority of Bithynia was now under Ottoman control, with the exception of a few villages and settlements along the Bosporus Strait. While Orhan was out conquering towns and cities for the Ottoman Beylik,
Crap, they lost all of Anatolia so quick.
Aydin Pasha, from the new capital of Bursa, began a series of political and military reforms in order to better legitimize Ottoman power in the region. The Grand Vizier would first establish an Ottoman monetary system in which silver coins were stamped with Orhan's name, thus legitimizing the Ottoman Bey as a proper Turkic ruler in the region. Secondly, a new imperial dress code was adopted for governmental and military workers within the Beylik, as a way to emulate the Seljuk royal court of old. Lastly, a standing army of salaried soldiers was established in the form of the Yaya and Muslim military corps. However, many Muslim Turkomans still preferred being granted land fiefdoms called timars by the Ottoman government instead. No doubt Alaeddin Pasha had many more reforms planned, but sometime during the conclusion of the siege of Nicaea, he would fall ill and die in Bursa after years of loyally serving as his brother's right-hand man.
Wow. Those are some really great reforms that he made, you know. Really bringing the empire into its own with that currency coin and, you know, the standing army, which is always a good thing, you know. Well, yeah, you know, it's a logical evolution we've seen of many empires, and yeah, overall that seems like quite the loss to the Ottomans, because those brothers' teamwork seemed like they perfectly complemented each other, you know what I mean? One the military man, the other the political genius. I think of another situation, probably like Augustus and Agrippa, kind of like, you know, the best of both worlds coming together and working together. Like, that seems like quite the loss, but we'll see. Life goes on, right?
Back in the Byzantine Empire, the military and political situation would only get worse, as Andronikos III would be sucked into a three-way struggle in the Balkans between the Empire of Bulgaria and the emerging powerhouse that was the Kingdom of Serbia. During these inter-Christian conflicts in the summer of 1341, Andronikos III would suddenly fall ill with malaria and die, leaving the imperial throne to his 9-year-old son, John V Palaiologos. A regency was immediately established between the former emperor's confidant, John Kantakouzenos, Empress Dowager Anna of Savoy, and Ecumenical Patriarch John Kelekas. However, when Kantakouzenos left the capital to fend off a Serbian invasion in the Balkans, the latter two regents would conduct a palace coup and named Kantakouzenos and his supporters as enemies of the state. What followed was a 6-year bloody civil war.
Guys, can you not have a civil war for 5 minutes? Like, you're falling apart. Like, you have enough enemies around you. You don't need to fight. I'm telling you, the Romans were so self-destructive, man. They loved to fight each other. You know? And, yeah, like, these constant civil wars are not great for manpower or resources, just a waste fighting yourselves. At the end, you're not gaining anything other, you know, killing your own people, right? So, I don't know. Like I said, their position is already bad enough. Like, they're surrounded on all sides by enemies. So, man.
War, which would see Byzantine society fracture in two, as the urban populace of the empire supported John V, while the rural lands supported Kantakouzenos. Having lost all support in the major cities of Thrace, with the exception of Didymatiko, and desertions plaguing his armies, Kantakouzenos would turn to the Turks of Anatolia to bolster his ranks. The Byzantine magnate would first employ the services of Amur the Lion of the Aydinids. However, the Turkic warlord would withdraw from the civil war when Crusader forces from Europe invaded his Beylik in 1343. Kantakouzenos would then turn to the Ottoman and Saracen Beyliks for assistance, even offering the Ottoman Bey his eldest daughter's hand in marriage to solidify the alliance between their two states. Accepting the offer in a lavish ceremony in the town of Salimbria, Orhan Gazi and Theodora Kantakouzene would be married in front of Kantakouzenos' family, thus making the Bey of the Ottomans the son-in-law to the Byzantine magnate.
Oh boy. Assuming that now Cantaconenso, yeah, I can't say this dude. Can I call him like Kant? Like the first here, Kant. Okay, so assuming now that Kant wins the Civil War and gets power again, that like by proxy would make Orhan kind of a part of like Byzantine politics. At least like, yeah, like what, the stepson of one of the most powerful Byzantine. So that kind of like puts him in, right? That would kind of create some type of legitimacy, I would imagine, or at least get his foot in the door, right? Of Byzantine politics as a kind of like player, not just an outsider anymore, you know what I mean? So that kind of would help the Ottomans a lot, especially if they keep going, assuming Kant wins. But yeah, that's interesting. Again, like, the Romans are so self-destructive, they're fighting each other, just kind of allowing outside forces that kind of want to take their territory already, like the Ottomans, more involved. So, that's interesting, you know?
With the marriage solidified and a couple of thousand Ottoman soldiers being ferried into Byzantine Thrace, Kantakouzenos would effectively change the tides of the war in his favour, and by 1347 he would seize Constantinople and proclaim himself as senior co-emperor to John V. Even though the civil war was now over, Byzantine territory in the Balkans had been carved up severely by the newly formed Serbian Empire under Emperor Stefan Uroš IV Dušan and the Bulgarian Empire.
Yeah, they basically lost a lot of their Greek holdings, right? They have Thessaloniki. They have Sparta. Holy crap, we're just watching the... Like I said, this series is the rise of the Ottomans, and probably like a subtitle would be the death of Rome or something. But, yeah.
In addition to major territorial losses, the Byzantine countryside of Thrace was thoroughly pillaged by Turkic mercenary soldiers during the war, leaving the empire in a state of economic and social crisis. While the Byzantine Empire was in disarray, Orhan Gazi, during the year 1345, would take advantage of another neighbouring civil war, this time in the Karasid Beylik. A bloody succession war between the sons of the former bey in the region had broke out, leading to an Ottoman military intervention by Orhan and his son Suleiman Pasha on the basis of re-establishing peace within a fellow Muslim nation. However, by the end of the conflict, the sons of the former Karasid Bey would be put under Ottoman house arrest, and the Beylik would be formally annexed into the Ottoman realm a few years.
Again, Orhan getting involved in these civil wars is such a big brain move, right? Like he has some type of like clout with the Byzantines now, simply by being the stepson of the co-senior emperor. Already, he's technically involved now in terms of the family of the Byzantines, which is insane. And now, through this more diplomatic just overtaking of a fellow Turkish nation, like, that's amazing. He's seizing the disunity of his neighbors and just getting himself more clout, as it were, you know? I don't know, that's kind of genius.
Years later, the large Karasid navy, famous for its piratical exploits on the Aegean and its many talented Turkic soldiers and generals, would now be under the service of Orhan and his successors. Back in the Byzantine Empire, the dual rule between John V Palaiologos and John VI Kantakouzenos had become untenable, as the two rulers and their respective factions butted heads in the governance of the state. With the imperial armies in shambles, domestic economy shattered, and the arrival of the Black Death from Crimea, tensions within Constantinople were at a political boiling point.
Okay, so plague-infected cadavers capitulated into the cities by the Mongols led to the spread of plague in all of Europe. Oh boy.
Gathering up Serbian, Venetian and Genoese fiscal and military support, in 1352, the junior co-emperor of the Byzantines would invade the territories of Kantakozenos' holdings in Thrace, thus sparking a new round.
Guys. Guys, come on. Holy, like, you think after witnessing the complete shrinking of your empire, you'd be like, you know what, we need to, like, focus on, like, you know, either consolidating what we have, like, saving resources, or, like, fighting off those around us, but now they're like, let's have another civil war. The Romans, man.
Round of civil war. John VI Kantakozenos would once again call forth Ottoman support for his war effort. Now in his 70s, Orhan Gazi would entrust Ottoman military operations to his son Suleiman Pasha. A 10,000-strong Ottoman army, consisting of mostly cavalry, would be transported to Thrace, which would result in Kantakozeni forces defeating the coalition army of John V during the Battle of Didymateiko by the end of the year. After the decisive battle, John VI Kantakozenos would declare victory against the Palaiologos family, delegitimizing the junior emperor John V in favor of his son Matthew. However, crises would persist as Ottoman forces, led by Suleiman Pasha, began raiding the countryside of Thrace, occupying the fort of Tezimpi in the process. While negotiations for the return of the fort were underway on the night of March 2nd, 1354, the whole coastline of Thrace was devastated by a massive earthquake. Major towns in the region, like Gallipoli, saw their fortifications destroyed and their inhabitants dispersed. Seeing the magnitude of destruction from the Asian side of the Hellespont, Suleiman Pasha would quickly order the construction of rafts to cross over the channel and gathered a great crowd.
Yeah, Suleiman is just taking it, and that's kind of the problem when you invite these foreign powers, right, into your conflicts. Like, they're just gonna take more, and especially of power like the Ottomans, which were already established as taking from the Byzantines. Like, all they did was open the door even wider for them to take more. And that's exactly what they're doing, so they shouldn't be shocked when the Ottomans are just continuing what they already were doing and taking more for themselves, you know? And, yeah, Suleiman is just gonna take more, right? Yeah, really, like, just seizing the opportunity, as it were.
Of Turkic families to get ready to repair and resettle the towns of the Gallipoli Peninsula. Before long, the first Ottoman families stepped foot into Europe, and the fort at Gallipoli was taken over by a substantial Ottoman garrison. Hearing the news that the Turks had crossed into Europe, in an act of desperation, Kantakozenos offered Suleiman 4 times the amount of tribute that he'd previously proposed in previous negotiations for Simpi, and for the Ottoman withdrawal from the entire region. However, the Ottoman leader shot back, stating that his troops had merely taken over a number of places that had been deserted by their Greek inhabitants, and that Gallipoli had fallen to him by the will of God and not by force. Suleiman Pasha, who had by then taken over the Ottoman military after his father's steady retirement from public life, would not honor the formal alliance between Constantinople and Bursa, but instead opted for a more aggressive posture against.
Yeah, definitely. Suleiman is just going for it. Much more aggressive and just taking, you know? It seems like he, you know, unlike his father, won't just settle for this, like, a negotiation. He'll just be like, well, we're just gonna take it all. So yeah. It's all coming back to bite the Byzantines, eh?
Kantakozenos in order to take advantage of the destabilizing Byzantine Empire. By the summer of the same year, Suleiman Pasha would begin his much-awaited military campaign in Byzantine Thrace, capturing the towns of Kesan, Tekirdağ and Kolu in rapid succession. Meanwhile, back in the Byzantine capital, Kantakozenos' rule became increasingly unpopular due to the Byzantine policy of containing the Turks in Anatolia failing disastrously. By the end of the year, the more popular John V Palaiologos would be invited back to the capital to rule as co-emperor to Kantakozenos, and before long, the latter would retire to a monastery in disgrace. Within 3 years, the last forces of Matthew Kantakozenos would be defeated in Thrace, thus ending another round of Byzantine civil wars. The bloodshed of the last 16 years had devastated the Roman world to the point of no return, as the empire was now reduced to a few lands in Thrace, Macedonia, the Aegean, and the Morea. In addition to
They are so small, dude. And a lot of it, some of their actions, not all their fault, but some, they didn't help themselves at times, especially with, you know, their other internal issues that they created for themselves. Dude, they are surrounded. Holy crap, that's terrifying. Like, they are in the worst position ever I think you could be in.
territorial losses, Constantinople would not be able to deploy proper field armies anymore like in the past, as its economic and military capabilities were slashed severely. All of this resulted in the remaining Byzantine realm now being heavily reliant on the Italian maritime republics of Venice and Genoa for military, political, and economic support in the upcoming decades. With Osman and Orhan securing early victories against the Byzantines and...
Yeah, I'm gonna have to end the video here. I went over time. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.